Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa no mai haere mai, ko Vahid tōku ingo. Welcome everyone to Dice Legends. It is great to have you here with us. I have the honor of chatting on this live stream today with a good friend, Associate Professor Sophie Goldingay, who works at Deakin University in Australia. And we're going to be talking about, well, look, those of us that play D&D, we like to think that it's not only an enjoyable pursuit, but also has some kind of value to it, right? You know, and so I was really excited when a friend that I've known for many years, who works in academia, was involved in some research into the value of narrative game. And so we're chatting with Sophie Goldingay today.
Hi, Vahid. Hi, everyone. How you going?
I'm very, very well, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. We started talking about this ages ago, didn't we?
We did actually. Not even imagining that we'd have this opportunity to share the ideas more broadly. But I'm just really thrilled to have been invited today. Great to see you, Vahid. As you said, we've known each other for many years. Yes, I'd just like to start off by acknowledging that I'm actually in Australia, currently on the land of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and also to shout out to the traditional custodians of the lands that listeners are on as well, if you're in a colonised country. So I'm an academic and a social worker, and also I'm a mother. And so I now have young people who are aged 21 and 19, and so I've been working in social work for many years, working with young people. So I'm just looking forward to sharing with you some of the things we've found and explored, over the years. So I'm not presenting myself as an absolute expert on anything. Just providing, one perspective from some of the things that we've found. But if there's questions that we can't answer, let's see if we can figure out how to answer them together.
That sounds great. Okay, so people, if you're watching this live, please do consider questions that you might want to have to pose, and we'll explore it. So why don't we... how about we start by giving some context of how you got interested in this idea of narrative stories and games having some value?
Well, I'd love to tell you about that, Vahid. In some ways, you and your family are a wee bit involved. Because when our young people were young, they used to spend some time together. And one of the things they used to love doing is getting together and coming up with stories and, like little plays to put on. And they loved doing it. And I could just see how much they developed and grew through doing that. They're having such fun. And then when, because that was in New Zealand, and when we came here, my sons continued doing that, and they continued to create these kind of like stories together. And I could just see how much they were growing and developing through doing that. And, they were having real fun, But alongside that, in addition to being a mother and noticing that in my own personal life, I was also a social worker, and I worked with some populations, I guess, who had some very difficult experiences and traumas. So I worked as a social worker in a women's prison, and I also worked as a social worker in mental health settings. And while I was working in the prison service, I noticed that many of the young, or all of the women in prison would talk about how surprised they were. When they found themselves on the wrong side of the law, for example, that they hadn't imagined different people's perspectives, or perhaps that they hadn't been able to manage their own feelings, and they hadn't been able to problem solve when a really difficult situation had come up. And so it seemed to me that there seemed to be this sort of pattern that people who were criminalized, serving prison sentences, had difficulty with problem solving and flexible thinking, self-management, and imagining the perspective of others, like theory of mind. And so I realized that there was a real gap in services for this. There's cognitive behavioral therapy thrown at, most people for most things. But for many populations, it didn't really fix the problem. And in fact, for some in the prison service, they had this program called Straight Thinking. And the people who underwent straight thinking actually reoffended and came back more often than the ones who didn't do it at all.
That's
So it
not
was
what you want.
clearly not what you want. It clearly just wasn't actually getting to the heart of what people needed. So I just happened to be talking with a colleague who's an occupational therapist, and this was back in 2010 actually. We just happened to be having a cup of tea together, and her speciality is pretend play, and she worked with young children. And I was talking to her about this problem and how I was searching for a way to address it, because I guess my mission as a social worker is to just improve the quality of life for people.
Sure.
Because people want to be socially connected, and people want to be able to problem solve. And I said to her, my young people, they used to love creating these the characters and stories. They love to imagine that they were like movie directors, and put on shows for people, and they had such fun. I could see how much they're developing. And she said, "Oh, that's exactly what pretend play is. Pretend play is what develops flexible thinking. It's what develops the ability to imagine the perspective of others and negotiate meaning." And so that was where our collaboration was born. And I remember, when I said, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if we had a program that did that, and that we could perhaps measure how much people had improved on those particular abilities of flexible thinking and ability to create narrative and imagine the perspective of others," which we then did. And she said to me, "Oh, Sophie, I think that's got legs." And sure enough, it has had, because we've created a program of research around it. So, but what I'm sharing with everyone today is not an assumption that I think that, people have got social difficulties and therefore they need this program. What I'm sharing with you today is that play is a lifelong activity, and that all of us benefit from play all through our lifetimes, because it continues that ability that we all need in order to socialize effectively, which is imagining perspectives of others, empathy, flexible thinking, and problem solving as well. So that's where I'm coming from and sharing what I know and what I've found today.
Yeah, cool.
Because play really is a lifelong activity, and our brains are always evolving. Our brains are plastic. You might have heard of neuroplasticity. So whenever anyone is playing and really having fun, you're developing those abilities, like strengthening those neural pathways. And the other reason why I'm interested in this is my sons are both gamers, and one of them particularly loves Dungeons and Dragons.
Aha.
And there's some corners of the community that seem to equate online gaming with somehow being antisocial. Well, in my view and from my research, I think the opposite is true, because especially those kind of games where you're negotiating meaning together, where you're creating stories together, developing narratives, and when you create a character and give it a selfhood, you're actually creating the ability to imagine the perspective of that character. So you're developing your ability to have empathy for people and develop your theory of mind. And so, I persisted with supporting my young people to continue to game, especially in that online forum, and the knowledge that that was supporting their social development. And sure enough, they're both extremely well-adjusted, socially connected young men. And to difference to the naysayers who were going, screen time.
Yeah. Well, in the early days when I was first introduced to Dungeons and Dragons, and we did a lot of our narrative play in my family was my brother, sister, and I playing Dungeons and Dragons. And in those days, where I lived, which is in North America, there was a lot of worry that it had some kind of demonic elements to it.
I had heard that, yeah.
And there was a lot of fear, and they call it in the D&D world, they call it the Satanic Panic. And so my mother, when her friends found out that me, my brother, and sister were playing these games, and they were really cautioning my mother, are you sure that this is safe for your children? My mother thank God, picked up the books to try to figure out by herself, to independently investigate the truth for herself, looked at the books, read through them, observed us playing them, and thought, they're learning maths, they're reading, they're doing a whole bunch of map making, they're creating worlds, they're writing stories. What's the problem?
Good on her. And writing stories. I mean, how useful is that? How important is that? That would have helped everybody's English marks, no end, I'm sure.
And quick maths, honestly. Like, adding units of 20s together. My brother, sister, and I, thanks to this pursuit, we can do quick maths. Boom, boom,
Yes.
boom, boom, boom.
Exactly. You've developed those neural pathways, haven't you?
Yeah.
And you've developed it while you've been in that zone of fun. So like it's true learning, the connections are, not hindered by trauma or stress,
So are you suggesting that when, I don't know if this is going beyond, but so when we're doing a pursuit that we enjoy and learning at the same time, I do actually wonder if we learn more easily in those environments.
Agree. And it's really deep learning, really lasting learning. Yes. It's well known that if you're really in the zone of play, and anyone who's interested in play, Google it up because there's lots of research about it, how when you're in the fun zone, you really are, your brain is really healthy. It's really great brain chemistry. It provides, dopamine and, it's serotonin, all the good things we need for a healthy, functioning brain and positive mood and mindset.
So it's not just flippant then. There is value already.
There is, yes, there's scientific value. I could share some slides if people are interested.
Please do, yes.
You want me to do that now?
Yeah, you share your screen, and once you've done that, I can flick that over here as well, so they can see it.
Yeah.
All right. You are on.
Oops, sorry, just go through. Yeah. So you'll see here on the slide that there's a young person who's in a cardboard box with a cardboard tube looking through. And one of the really important aspects of play is what we call object substitution. And the process of object substitution when you're playing with anyone is really the developing of meaning. So while we all know cognitively that that's a cardboard box and a cardboard tube, right, there's no doubt, is there, around what the meaning of what those objects are. And we all know, really, that he is in a boat looking out to sea with a telescope.
Exactly.
Right?
Sure, of course.
And that's the sort of play we're talking about, with that object substitution, using the imagination to, negotiate the meaning of objects beyond what they actually are. So this is a stapler, but it could be a turtle or a snake. And it's that negotiation of meaning. So when we're young, that's the kind of play, pretend play, that's really, really helpful in developing that flexible thinking and negotiative meaning and narrative. Of course, when we're in adolescence, we don't play with cardboard boxes or glad wrap tubes anymore. The play flips, and it's all kind of in our heads. And so, as you can see here, there's object substitution in childhood. The young people are creating pictures to represent things. But of course, the young people, who are grown up, they're actually starting to share ideas and negotiate meaning through their conversation and their storytelling. So that's what I mean by play being a lifelong activity. Whenever we're storytelling with people, we're also continuing that brain development. And I think, tabletop role-playing games develop it one step further, because not only are you just storytelling, you're actually, creating characters. So it's even more therapeutic than a conversation, nice. In my view. So I've got a little bit of research here that listeners might be interested in, and people might have heard of Brian Perry, who's a well-known neuroscientist, and he talks about the neurosequential model of therapeutics. And you'll see that, we've got different parts of our brains that are involved in different things for us, starting with the brainstem. But if you see at the very top, the cortical section is where you really encourage abstract thought And that's where storytelling, drama, art, writing, and opera, those are all of the activities that develop those kind of abilities, problem solving, narrative. There's other things too, where play therapy can, work on our limbic system to help us with emotional regulation, which is important as well. And of course, so you can see that there's a bit of a hierarchy there, but things like role-playing games, which involve drama and theatre and storytelling, are at the top of the list of things that are really great for your brain and its ongoing development.
Cool.
And like I keep saying to you, we're all developing all the time. We don't just get to the adolescence and stop. We're always developing abilities, and we have to keep practicing them. We really do, to keep practice. And I mean, many people have told me that, after being involved, with the pandemic and being very isolated, they feel that their social skills have, really declined. So they haven't had this ability to mix, except for those who've done online gaming, of course.
Sure.
But those that don't, their skills kind of decline if you don't keep using them.
Yeah.
So I just really strongly support people to continue playing. And if you can't physically get to play online.
Sure.
So, how lucky are we to be alive now when this is an opportunity for people?
Sure.
Because I'd imagine in the 1918 pandemic, people didn't have that opportunity to do that. So it's pretty lucky to be around now.
Yeah.
So, and just drawing on what you were just saying before, for play to be effective neurologically has to be fun. So we need to be in the zone, with someone else, or, just, having fun, laughing, fully engaged in the moment. And you can see there's a little bit more research there underneath, that might be interesting to people. I can forward these at a later date if people are interested.
Cool.
And you're talking about, brain health, and we're talking about, what makes us feel good.
Yeah.
Play is good brain chemistry. So, play and just the natural opioids in our brain that make us feel good. Play is, the best that you can have. And you need that for that deeply fulfilling life, and it stimulates dopamine as well.
Cool.
So do you want me to keep going, or did you have any?
Go.
Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to share also is just in terms of like what's happening in the brain when we are telling stories. And of course, we've got the left and the right hand sides of the brain, and they need to be integrated, because, they're really important to our functioning in all spheres of life. So our right brain, of course, is the non-verbal, that's processing our emotions and memories and our, sense of identity. But then it needs to be integrated with our left side, which is a language, order, linear sequence, making sense of feelings and so on. And of course, if we're telling a story, so, if you imagine yourself, you're in a conversation and, you hear the other people talking, and you get this feeling inside that you think, oh, I've got something I can contribute. And you visualize the feeling that you had that you want to share with somebody else. So that starts with your right-hand side, you think, oh, this will be something that people will be interested to share.
Sure.
And then your brain has to flip to the other side to convert it into words.
Right.
You have to express it. So, and for some people, some of the populations I work with, they might have difficulty at this stage. Maybe they can't form it into words, create it in the logical sequence, because of course the process of creating that logical sequence supports our brains to think in consequential and sequential ways, which is essential for problem solving. I don't know if any of you have ever met someone that has difficulty with consequential thinking. I know people who have that. And possibly they didn't have the opportunities to practice those pretend play activities in childhood. But of course, like I said, play is a lifelong activity. And it's something that,
right?
Brain is plastic. That's right. And so therapeutically, we've worked with people who have difficulties with that sort of consequential thinking and involve them in activities like role-playing games and, creating characters and having to develop a narrative with that sequential thinking, and then tested them and found that they really did develop in that area. So of course that it's like a spiral. I think when we're telling a story, so we try and convert it and this all happens in a split second. You've got to think of the idea, then you've got to convert it into words, and then you've got to be able to tell it in a coherent way.
Yeah.
It's amazing actually how complex that activity is. And of course, in that process of telling, we're defining our identities and we're creating that narrative about who we are. And also doing so, some of the most effective storytellers, the ones that are really the life of the party, are the ones that are able to take their listeners to the place where they were.
Sure.
It's like a bonding experience, isn't it? So, you imagine, I want to share something that was really exciting or thrilling. And then if you tell it in a way that it brings people along with that, and people are taken to that same state of being, that's a real bonding process, that connection that we have. And that's how relationships are built.
Cool.
So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Sophie, for that. It's really interesting, the crossover between the right and left hemisphere of the brain, isn't it?
And that we're doing it all the time, doing it right now.
Yeah, fascinating. So you've mentioned a number of things a couple of times, and I'd just like to drill down into them a little bit more to see what you mean and what it affects. You've mentioned some of the values of games like Dungeons & Dragons and other narrative-based kind of creative games of this. And you've mentioned seeing from different people's perspectives. You've mentioned problem solving, and you've mentioned empathy. I was just wondering if you could drill down into those.
So, and like I said again, the idea came from watching my own children, wanting to be movie directors and create characters. So what we created in Australia is a program called Imagine, Create, Belong. We have a website. And in that program, we train facilitators in the method, and those facilitators run small groups of young people who want to develop in their social abilities. And during the program, they're invited to imagine that they are movie directors, and they're invited to create a character that's going to be part of the story that we're going to create together. And we get FEMO. I don't know if you've heard of FEMO, that sort of modeling clay that you can, and we use that because, you can create it and then you can pop it in the oven and it hardens. Some people prefer to use blue tack so that they can maybe have a character that changes form more. So that's perfectly fine as well. And in the process of creating that character, we invite them to give that character an identity. So we invite them to do like a genogram for the character, imagine what their family and background is like and how does that influence who that person is. Because we're on First Nations land here, we draw on a concept called the Tree of Life, which is a Wadawurrung concept where people can create their own tree of life to express their identity. But first off, they'll do their own. So we invite people to do their own genogram and their own tree of life, and then we invite them to do one for their character. So they're actually starting to give this character life. And imagine what a day in the life is of their character. What are some of their strengths? What are some of their challenges? And often, the character traits that are strengths can also be their deepest problems as well. And how might that manifest in a story? So it's like an ongoing iterative process that we invite participants to take part in. The current age group we do it for is 11 to 15. But I think, Dungeons and Dragons is kind of like the next iteration for people who may be older than that, where, I know that you create characters and you create those stories around that. So the process of creating a story, again, is that negotiated shared meaning making. And that involves the skills of sequential thought, problem solving, and of course, the empathy and theory of mind as well. So all of those activities build those abilities in the participants. And like I said, what we've been doing is inviting people to do a wee test at the beginning before they undertake the program to see what their baseline is in terms of their narrative ability and their social ability.
Okay.
And then after they've done the program, we then test them again.
Yeah, and what have you found?
We actually compared too. So I've got a paper that I wrote, which I can share afterwards with some colleagues, a psychologist and occupational therapist and community nurse as well. So we compared the findings between the group that undergone the pretend play version of creating a movie, having a social skills group, and then a cognitive behavioral based group, which still created a movie. And then we tested before and after. And the group that did the pretend play version, they improved in their flexible thinking, they improved in their sequential thinking and ability to tell a story. And we test that through what we call the animated movie test, which we created around the same idea. With the group that did the cognitive behavioral therapy, their flexible thinking actually declined.
Oh my goodness.
It was very surprising. But they did improve in their community engagement, because the cognitive behavioral therapy was more sort of like rote learning.
Right.
Learning rules, like thinking about thinking and those kind of things, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But for the particular deep abilities that we were wanting to address, that they're really things that people need to be able to take with them no matter where they are, and to be able to, apply social skills in multiple unpredictable settings.
Wow, yeah.
In some ways, cognitive behavioral therapy can't do that, because it only prepares for things that you've already thought of.
Sure.
And for many people, they can't translate that ability into other situations. But if you actually change the structure of the brain through those activities, you've actually developed an ability that they can apply in multiple situations.
And more flexible thinking.
Yeah, flexible thinking, problem solving, and theory of mind. That's
really interesting. And I was fascinated at what you mentioned at the beginning, that some of the populations you're working with, especially those that had been incarcerated, that it was found that some of these people had clearly not really didn't have that sense of effects, cause and effect, or what was the phrase you used? You used a phrase.
Consequential thinking.
Consequential thinking.
That's the one. They did not.
And
that's exactly it.
And it's fascinating that these pursuits, which just seem like a lot of fun, also have the benefit of increasing our ability to have consequential thinking.
Exactly. And, the way we're all brought up is, you have to be punished to learn consequences. But that actually, for most people, is the opposite of what needs to happen to support the ability to think in consequential ways. It's play and fun that develops that ability, not punishment. And because everyone has found that the people who are incarcerated, they're more likely to reoffend, not less.
That's right. Yeah. And empathy is another one that you mentioned as well. And I remember you and I had a conversation about this many months ago when you were first sharing this research with me, and I was really fascinated by this concept that when one creates a character, you're putting your conscious mind in another place. And then
exactly.
You're forcing yourself to see through another person's eyes.
Exactly.
And that then informs our ability to do that in real life.
Precisely. That's exactly what happens.
And I just, when you shared that with me, and this was like over a year, maybe even 2 years ago that you shared, I thought, wow, that's fascinating, that there's some value in this, in creating these characters.
So it's not just sort of, just fun that you do that's not work. It's like, play is child's work. You've probably heard that before. But when we're playing, we are actually really growing ourselves. When we're doing that, especially if it's the sort of play where we're imagining ourselves looking through the eyes of someone else, we're developing that. And I mean, those are the kind of skills that really enrich our relationships, to be able to see through the eyes of someone else.
Yeah. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say actually globally.
Yeah.
Problems in the world in general would be reduced if people were able to more see, rather than through their own self eyes, through the eyes of others, and the impact that their own actions have for good or for ill on others.
And as you can see, it's complex too, because it's the combination of both empathy and flexible thinking and sequential thinking that's needed, not just one on its own.
Yeah.
You need all of those things to be able to take action in the real world.
Yeah, fascinating. So what about,
I
I
think
would
this.
like to talk talk about the socialization aspects of it. Because, this kind of flexible thinking and problem solving and empathy, that's kind of centered within oneself. What's the value in terms of socialization? Because you mentioned earlier that even, that online socializing through games has value as well. Of course, it's lovely when we're able to be together physically, of course. What's your understanding of the value of the socialization aspects of this?
Well, I think we're all social beings, and we all need to feel connected and belonging. And I think when we're playing a game like role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, we feel we're part of that process, and it's just essential, I think, for everyone's well-being. And I'd imagine when you're playing a game, you can participate at the level that you feel you're able to. You can put in what you feel comfortable with and withdraw if needed. But I just think that it's just really important that people are able to continue to be social, like I said, to continue that ability to feel connected to others. There's been so many mental health problems that have shown up since the pandemic, where people have been so isolated.
Sure.
So many young people, their mental health has just taken such a turn for the worst because of the isolation, imposed by the pandemic, not being able to mix, not being able to socialize. They're losing skills, you're losing connections, and we need to feel connected, for our sense of ourself and our identity. It's a human need.
It is a human need. It's fascinating, isn't it? Like some creatures in our world can live relatively solitary existences, right? Or in small groups and then just come together every once in a while. But that's not us.
No, we're made to be social.
We are.
It's embedded in our DNA.
It,
I mean, well, maybe want different levels. And I mean, I call myself an introvert. So, I love people. But then after I've been socializing, I need to go home and spend a few hours by myself, and then I'll restore and then I'm ready to go again.
yeah.
But if I didn't have that social connection, I wouldn't be healthy at all. I wouldn't be happy. So others might relate to that. Just because you need to have time alone to restore doesn't mean to say you're not social.
Indeed.
We're all social, but maybe have just different needs. People who might define themselves as extroverts might need to be out there more. But we all need to feel connected and belonging. It's just a need, I think.
So you talked quite a bit about feeling of connection. The belonging one is an interesting one as well, isn't it? That to feel part of. And what's that about? Is that a feeling part of like a tribe, or where you feel that you, is that
Well, I
part
think
of
that
a
comes
human
down
need of
to
love, or
Yep. I think just shared understandings too. Yeah. So, I was mentioning about like the process of conversation, and I don't know about you, but sometimes you might feel on the outer of a conversation. I know some people might have felt that, and that might be because you feel you haven't got anything that you can contribute, or you can't imagine, what's happening. So when you actually do get in the zone of a conversation, if you can think back to a time when you were really having fun, think what was actually happening there, where I felt that I really belonged there. And it will be that you are sharing and bonding over that shared experience, sharing a laugh together, sharing a moment together that you could relate to.
Yeah. And I guess
So,
in the context of our conversation here about its relevance to Dungeons and Dragons and other pursuits like that, it is definitely a case that when people come together, they create a shared narrative. They
exactly.
all contribute to the extent that they want to, right?
Yeah.
And there is.
And every person's got their place.
Yes, right. And often these groups can go on, sometimes they're just a group for one afternoon or one evening, but then often they can be groups that span a lifetime.
And
Right?
how good is that? How wonderful.
Like my brother and a couple of friends of ours have been doing this since we were teenagers, We have decades of shared belonging.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And how good that it's so good for any person to feel part of something. Again, for your mental health, for your sense of self, for your identity, we all need to feel we belong. And I think, games like Dungeons and Dragons can help people feel that they belong at a level that they feel comfortable with. And to have something that exists over decades, how great is that?
It's astonishing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. The last question that I want, last topic that I wanted to explore with you before we turn to people in chat and see if there's any comments or questions from them, is I'd love to talk about shared narrative itself, the value of story itself. Because we've talked about creating characters, we've talked about coming together and belonging and empathy and flexible. What about story itself? Do you have any thoughts on the value of story or narrative in itself, and that shared kind of thing that happens in D&D?
Well, I think it's just really more of the same. That creating a story is just developing that those shared meanings together. Just like in a conversation. So when you're doing that shared story making in Dungeons and Dragons, you're developing that ability in your brain that then can inform your ability to converse and make conversation with others and engage in deep conversation that's really fun and enjoyable. Because if you think about it, whenever we're together, we tell stories, don't we?
Oh,
and we
sure.
we create our own identities through those stories.
Yeah.
So, for listeners at home, think of a time when you were with somebody that you really feel good with, and you're having a great conversation, and you think you're having a happy time. What was happening? And chances are you were talking about and sharing some experiences together, and both of you completely got, or all of you got exactly what you meant and shared that feeling together and bonded on that. And enjoyed it. Could have been a joke or telling a story. But in the process of telling that story, you're creating that identity of who you are, in that moment. When we tell stories, of course, cultural differences, I know, in terms of how much self-deprecation we might use. Like in New Zealand, I know it's never okay to kind of make out like you're really great. So you'll always perhaps talk slightly, talk yourself down a wee bit.
Yeah. I was used
and the way you create, and that people think that that's socially acceptable and good, and but then in other cultures that might not be. So it's cultural as well, I think. Here in Australia, amongst First Nations people, where I am, that the go is to just share about your background and who you are in terms of where you're from and your your connection to country. So people who are First Nations around the world might have similarities to that, where your identity is actually based on the stories of your country, and who you are in relation to that.
Sure.
So I think that is cultural and changes across time. But First Nations people are like the original storytellers. Here in Australia, First Nations people have been storytelling for 60,000 years, and it's like the central tenet of society and identity.
Yeah.
So I can't emphasize enough the importance.
Yeah, I think my own experience is that shared storytelling accesses a part of the brain deep in the mind and the memory in ways that other aspects of my life don't. So, like I mentioned that my brother and some friends, we've been doing these games together for decades. And I have visual images in my mind that are very clear, that are from decades ago, that were completely created. They were a complete theater of the mind, right? They're a complete fiction. And yet, I can remember them very clearly. It's such a powerful mental tool.
Absolutely. And of course, you've got positive feelings connected with those as well. So, there's a connection between, memory and how we're feeling at the time and our emotions. So, having those things connected with positive emotions will mean that when you think of those, you'll feel good things, which is, really good for your mental health. So, if you're having a really bad day and, things aren't going well, which happens to us all sometimes, you can flick to those memories and feel good. I guess it's another form of mindfulness in some ways, isn't it? lots of people are talking about mindfulness as a way of, supporting resilience in this very challenging world. Well, I would think that D&D is a form of mindfulness in some ways, where you're creating a world, problem solving that world and creating with great memories attached.
We have a question that
Great.
would be fascinating. So reading aloud says, question, is role-playing games a therapeutic process because of the game mechanism regardless, I guess kind of regardless of the game, or is the ability to relax into it useful? I've heard of many people put off by initial experiences. Because, so to a bit of context for you, Sophie, because you don't actually play Dungeons & Dragons yourself, do you?
I don't.
Although
should have invited my son in because he does.
Because he does, and I do. So Dungeons & Dragons is just one of many games that do this same kind of thing. And some of them have different rule systems. And so when we're talking, when reading aloud, who is which is the name of the person in the chat that just said it, talks about game mechanism, is talking about, the rules and the things like that. And sometimes that could be off-putting for people if they get, if you get lost in the rules of it. So the question is, do we think it could be a therapeutic process kind of regardless of the game mechanisms? Because, and is the ability to relax into it, is it important that we're relaxed into it? Is that an important part of the process? Because they've heard of many people being put off by initial D&D experiences. Yeah, any thoughts?
I think that if a person's feeling stressed, it depends on the level. If someone was experiencing that, I would, suggest that they perhaps just, be kind to themselves and allow themselves to learn the rules in a relaxed way, and that other people in the game make sure it's a psychologically safe space to do that. I think that's really important to accept people as they are, and in terms of learning new things, and methods of that. I think I stand by the principle that if people are able to play it and to start to enjoy it, that they will get therapeutic benefit.
Yeah.
And even just because it is work as well. Learning any new thing is work, and you're developing neural pathways by learning new things, and at a pace that suits you. But I think I'd just like to emphasize anyone who isn't, who is game playing, who has a new person who looks like they're struggling to learn the rules, that make sure you do create a really psychologically safe space, where there's no mocking, there's no humiliation, there's no, that's perfectly acceptable, and acknowledge that it is difficult to learn new things that have got new rules.
Yeah, like I'll just pull up some of these books. Right, okay, so for a bit of context for you, Sophie, the core of Dungeons and Dragons rules are 3 books, right?
Wow.
And so it's understandable for someone when they're first getting into it to feel a sense of being overwhelmed. And so I think your advice that the group itself create a warm, welcoming space where people can learn the rules as they need to.
Exactly.
I think that's very wise, because otherwise it might be more traumatic than therapeutic.
Yes. And even maybe think of different ways that people can be supported to learn rules as well. Some people visual, some people auditory, some people, learn things on a deep level, put things in their long-term memory, which is very lasting, but maybe have trouble with short-term memory.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. So I think patience is important, understanding, acceptance, acceptance, not tolerance, acceptance, which means that nobody is
beyond tolerance, isn't it?
It is. It really is. Yeah. And strengths-based, not everyone's great at short-term memory. I know I'm not, actually. But, I'm an associate professor, so I've just found ways to get around it.
Yeah.
I've got a very good long-term memory. So I just have to remember my strengths at those moments when I can't remember things short-term.
Yeah.
So invite others who have similar, challenges to remember your strengths and to build on your strengths.
Yeah.
And for people in groups to do the same,
Yeah.
to look for what's great about a person and what they can do, not what they can't.
So I know your time is very valuable, but there's just two more questions that I'd like to explore, but we might have to deal with them pretty quickly because we've already gone over what you and I said at the beginning was going to be our maximum time. I'm so sorry, Sophie.
Fine.
The next question is from Proxima, hi Proxima, who regularly joins us in our conversations. Does rules-based interaction in Dungeons & Dragons help expression? Okay, so, because Dungeons & Dragons has rules. Do you think those rule mechanics have some bearing on being helpful, I guess, in this context that we're looking at? Any thoughts?
I think if it facilitates things running smoothly and people having fun, that's if it takes away the fun, then I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But if people feel comfortable with the rules, and they provide structure and context that enable people to not have to worry about whether they're doing things right or wrong, so they can put that aside and really have fun, then I think it's fine.
That's my feeling as well, although I'm not anything close to an academic on these kind of things, but that's my own experience as well, is that if the world building that we're in has some predefined boundaries and rule mechanisms, then we don't need to bother about that stuff.
Yeah.
We can just get in with, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And question, Redial says, I've noticed that in some cases, D&D can be an excellent outlet for people with social anxiety, among other things, since it helps them to socialize through a different perspective and voice. My question is there a good way for cases like that to help transfer that to their real lives? For instance, if someone has trouble answering a phone or talking to people in stores, etc., it doesn't feel quite right to give the advice, just act like your character. So it's about transferring those skills into real life. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share, Sophie?
Well, I guess I just to empathize that having anxieties is, it's can be a struggle for people. It's can make things more difficult. I think that the process of being exposed to things in a safe way can help anxiety, but I wouldn't be glib to say that would be the end of the issue. I think that role-playing games are great if people are feeling safe within that.
Yeah.
And that if people are wanting to try something that's out of the comfort zone, that needs to be in the safe zone, that's slightly beyond the comfort zone, but not in the panic zone.
There are 3 zones. There's the safe.
I read something recently on it actually. So you've got your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Where you're sitting on the couch, whatever. And then the other extreme is the panic zone, where you have a meltdown down and fall over and can't function at all.
Yeah.
But there's a zone between there where you're slightly out of your comfort zone, but not in such a way that you can't function anymore. So for anyone who experiences anxiety, and I do at times as well, I try to get myself where I'm slightly out of my comfort zone, but not so much that I'm going to fall over.
Very good.
And I think that's unique to each person. And perhaps if you have something that you really want to do, that you break it down into steps. If it's like talking on the phone, for example, what's the first step? Would it be maybe just texting, maybe leaving a message?
Sure.
I often, if I'm making a phone call, I'll write out a script.
Fascinating. That's a good idea, isn't it?
As a scaffold. And maybe think about a little bit of a kind of a I don't know if people know that program Twine, where you have different options of things that people anticipating what people might say. If they say this, I'll do this. If they say that, I'll do that. And and then I'll have a little bit of an out. If it looks like it's going out of my comfort zone into my panic zone, I'll think of an out that I can say, oh, sorry, it started raining, I've got to go and put the washing out, or something like that.
Cool.
So I just encourage people to be kind to themselves around those and think of some scaffolds.
Beautiful. Hey, look, we've taken a lot of your time, and I've really appreciated this opportunity to have this conversation. And people in the chat have been really engaged. Lots of people. I've only been able to read a handful of the questions out, but people have been saying all sorts of things. So to kind of do a terrible job of summarizing, we can see that play is an important part of human existence throughout our lives, and that it helps to enhance our brain development throughout our lives. It
Absolutely.
increases neuroplasticity, and games like Dungeons and Dragons help with our empathy, able to see from different people's perspective, looks at problem solving, helps us to negotiate meaning within groups, helps some of those social skills of feeling connected and belonging, and that your research has found that actually people that are socially disadvantaged often lack the ability to do those things.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that if people are given the opportunity to engage in pretend play, in an age-appropriate way, they can develop those abilities, not sort of in a trite social skills rote way, but in a true ability way that they can apply in other situations.
So Dungeons and Dragons in prison, that's what we're going.
That's always been my hope, but I've just started with the school age and working my way up.
Nice.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Vahid, and thanks everyone for listening and for your interest. If you Google me, Sophie Goldingay, you'll find papers that I've written, and if you have a look at the website, I don't know if I can put in the chat. Is there a chat?
Well, your chat is just with me on Zoom. It's not going to be with them, unfortunately.
Well, perhaps I can send it to you if people are interested
Send it to me
in the website.
I can share it on our Discord server. Our Discord server is a really cool place for people to go to be able to connect with us. So people, if you can, I've just put the link in the Discord server. By the way, a lot of people are saying, thank you very much, thanks very much, thanks Sophie, thank you. So a lot of people are saying thank you to you. And
that's a pleasure.
So yeah, if you send me that link, I can put it in our Discord. And if you're new to our channel, please do hit us with a follow, hit us with a subscribe, follow that Discord link that I've just given there, and we can post resources from Sophie there. So what I'm going to do is Sophie, I'm just going to say some closing things, and then we'll wrap it up. So I just want to say a big thanks to all of our supporters, people that support our channel, people that are following us already. Thank you so much. It really helps us. People that subscribe to us already, thank you so much. It really helps a lot. One of the ways that people help us is by being a Patreon. And Patreons are one of the, I'll see if I can spell it correct in the chat. Patreons are some of our, one of the most consistent way that people support our channel. Thank you very much. So just going to come back to you, Sophie, and say thank you so much for taking out the time to be with us. It's been really valuable, and always love hanging out with a friend.
The pleasure, Vahid. Great to see you, and thanks for listening, everyone.
Wonderful.
See you again another time.